welcome to bringing your app to market. So I'm going to introduce myself in a second, but this is the topic. Hello. Welcome. Have you come for the talk?
Yes.
Please come and sit. There's food if you sit up front. There's no food if you sit up the back, but just in time. Oh yes, exits are there, and Kath will direct you in case of an emergency, but we'll all just kind of rush out the front anyway. So portions of this talk will have lots of numbers and charts and things and will seem a little dry after a little while. So I thought it might be nice to start off with something a bit more whimsical. For those of you who aren't familiar with The Princess Bride, it's an American romantic comedy fantasy adventure film. And it's been acknowledged by people who know much more about film than I do as a serious, influential, funny, important film. So I'm going to follow The Princess Bride's model of introduction. This is Inigo Montoya, and this is his methodology for successful introductions and successful networking. So a polite greeting, a name, relevant personal link, and then to manage your expectations in your interactions. So let's see how Inigo does it.
Fail. I will go up to the six-fingered man and say, hello. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
So in that vein, hello, my name is Chia. I'm Chia on lots of social media and things like GitHub and Instagram, Twitter. The relevant personal link is that we're here for a bird's eye view of the App Store, informed by my personal history of making software products over the years. And I've made software since 1986, which is quite a long time. And I've made it for desktops, and then mobile devices, and then smartphones. One of my first apps was a tourism app for Victoria's Yarra Ranges, and was featured back in the day on the App Store when the iPhone of the day was an iPhone 4S. So I've witnessed many changes in the App Store economy since then, and the way software startups launch and scale to market their products. So to manage your expectations, this talk is about the business of apps. I won't be talking about software engineering. I won't be talking about what you do to build your thing on Android and how you do it differently to build on iOS. I'll be talking about the business of apps. There will be lots of information, but don't worry, you don't need to write notes unless you really, really want to, because at the end, there'll be a nice link and you can download all the relevant resources that I've quoted in this talk. So sit back, enjoy. Now there's a little note here that I'll be talking using stats from industry analysts, and the analysts kind of analyse the market and do their estimates. So none of the figures are exact. They might seem exact because they'll be like 0.3, but they're always estimates. And as we bounce between slide and slide, the numbers will go up and down. And you go, well, that last slide talked about 73%, and this one talks about 65%. But that's because they're estimates. And GAFA, which we'll mention in a moment, doesn't give much away, even in their quarterly reports. So are people familiar with the term GAFA? So GAFA is a term coined by Eric Schmidt, who was the chairperson of Google until recently. He coined it in 2011, and sometimes they're jokingly described as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So GAFA are Google, also known as Alphabet these days, Apple, Facebook, and Amazon. They're the 4 giants of the internet. And collectively, they're worth quite a lot of money. You know, Apple's over $1 trillion now in market cap, and Amazon recently went over $1 trillion and went back. And so every technology era has its drivers that change the whole industry. So in the 90s, it was Microsoft. it was Intel, it was Cisco, and it was Dell. Today, it's GAFA. And they will be your frenemies that we'll become familiar with tonight, because you need to cooperate with them, but you're also competing with them on a whole range of different levels. So, what's an app store? First of all, app is just a simple rebranding of the software program, the software application, so that punters, when they download the app, don't feel all geeky that I'm downloading a program to my phone. I'm downloading an app. It's a cool thing. That's all it is. But the App Store is big, and it's relatively new. If you think about comparisons, how do we compare the App Store to something we already know? This is actually a very good example. So the global movie industry gross in billions of dollars since 2008 is nudging somewhere a bit below $40 billion annually. And since 2008, so 10 years, it hasn't grown enormously. It hasn't changed in value enormously. 2008 is particularly important as a date because it was the year that the App Store on iOS launched for Apple. So July 10, 2008, the iPhone 3G came out with 500 apps in the App Store. This is what it looks like now. In the span of 10 years, just the Apple App Store alone has exceeded, because this is 2017 here, you can see that the trajectory, just the Apple App Store alone, without the Google Play Store, has exceeded the global box office for the entire movie industry. And this is how disruptive and transformative the App Store is. And I'll be talking about it as an economy because it really, really is. It's global distribution. This is a map of the Apple App Store. It covers a lot of places. The grey places are where it has partial distribution. Only the red areas are where it doesn't distribute. It's interesting because it's largely free of country-specific legal requirements. If you were to make an app and you wanted to sell there, or there, or there, you don't really have to worry very much about those countries' specific legal requirements to set up a shop. Imagine any other industry where you were in Launceston. You wanted to set up a shop in Vietnam, and then you wanted to set up a shop in Argentina, and then you wanted to set up a shop in Ireland. That's pretty complicated for any other business. I will note, though, that starting October 3rd, very, very soon, Apple will require all apps to have a privacy policy. Europe recently made into law their GDPR policy, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, and it's a privacy law that protects their individuals for data protection and privacy for all the individuals within the European Union and for data being exported outside of the European Union. So this is kind of following into line with that, but making it worldwide for Apple. It's interesting to note that Google hasn't done anything about it yet, because the two app stores, Google and Apple, are very interestingly different on privacy. Now, there are a range of smaller app stores in the world. They're country and device specific. There's WeChat in China, there's Amazon in America, there's the Windows desktop store, Microsoft store, the Mac app store for Mac desktops, Steam for games. We won't be talking about these today because there's lots of specific stuff, and we're just going to be talking about what I call a tale of two cities, the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. So if we look at it from this bird's eye view, you can see that the darker colours, like here, are where Google is predominant with Android, and the lighter colours are where Apple is more predominant with iPhones and iPads. So in the Northern American continent, it's roughly 50-50. In Southeast Asia, Africa, and South America, Android is predominant. Interestingly enough, if you look at Australia, Australia has this kind of market share, where this line is Apple and this line is Google. So it might seem that there are more Android phones in Australia, but it's actually not. There are more iOS users in Australia than Android users. And it's one of the rare exceptions in the world. If you look at the global market share, Android is 3 times larger in size, in terms of market share, than Apple iOS. So if you were a developer, you might think, fantastic, we'll just make for Android. We don't need to bother about Apple because the bulk of our customers are going to be on Android. You would be wrong to think that because it gets more complicated. In the fourth quarter of last year, Apple had 19% of global market share of smartphones in the world, and yet they reaped almost 90% of all the profits in the world. So if you think about how Apple is much smaller and makes so much more money than the vast number of Android users in the world, that starts explaining a few things about why you have your $200 Android phone as the cheapest new Android phone you can buy in Australia, versus the cheapest Apple phone is an iPhone 7, which is now 2 years old, at $750, going up to an eye-watering $2,369 for the latest greatest that was released last week. That's the iPhone XS Max with 0.5 gig of storage. Almost $2,500. So they're competing in very different areas. Android competes for the bulk of the market share, and they will sell phones that are not premium phones. Apple is like your BMW and your Mercedes and your Ferraris, in that people will only people will want to buy Apple because they are seeking a premium level of service and product. And it translates accordingly to the way people spend on the app stores. This is the second quarter of 2018. The Apple App Store earned 80% more than the Google Play Store. But you think, well, the Google Play Store is 3 times bigger. So that means that 3 times the number of people spent less money than that 1/3 representative of Apple. The average punter on the Google Play Store doesn't really want to buy your apps. They're very reluctant to spend money, partly because Google's one of the world's largest advertising companies. It's in Google's interests to have free apps that show ads. But if you have an Apple phone, you're willing to pay for premium quality, and your expectation is that the apps will also be of premium value. And so punters are more willing to part with hard-earned cash on the iOS store. The app stores represent an economy of what I would call micropayments. It's not true micropayments, because micropayments are usually amounts less than $1, whereas the cheapest amount you can spend for an app is 99 cents in America. But, you know, when we look back at this quarter of, $12 billion, it's all spent with these tiers of 99 cents and $1.99 and $2.99 and $3.99. All those 99 cents add up to a lot of money worldwide. This is a chart of Apple's pricing tiers. And there's a lot more countries. This is just a little excerpt of that. And you can see for the 99 cent tier, it translates to $1.49 in Australia and 120 yen in Japan, etc. And the tiers go all the way up to the maximum price you can charge for an app, which is $999.99 in America, which, due to the exchange rate, is $15.99.99 in Australia. People do buy those apps.
Know what they are?
Well, I've bought an app that was $350. It was made by Apple. It's called Logic. You can get professional software that used to cost much more than that on the App Store, and now because of the scale of the thing. Rather than paying $1,000 when you go into the shop and buy the box, you pay $350 to Apple and you get lifetime worth of free upgrades. Yes,
I'm not sure
Lucas.
if that's a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've seen two different apps that are like really expensive.
Yes.
One of them being an app where it just basically says, "Look at me, I'm rich" or something.
Yes.
So you buy it purely for the fact that
Yes.
you're buying something that costs that much.
People have done these little interesting experiments where they've made a nothing app, basically, that just says to other rich people, look, I can afford to pay this for an app.
There's that silly example, and then there's also like
Yeah.
speech software where like, someone in a wheelchair that can't talk
Yes.
like, perhaps needs to use an app.
Yes.
I've seen those two examples.
That's right. And those apps used to cost, in terms of going into a store and buying something like that for accessibility, 20 grand, whereas you could buy for $300 on the App Store.
Do we know what the sales look like for apps like that?
I do, and I can show you later, but it's not in this talk.
No worries.
Yes. Here's a pretty picture of the worldwide gross app avenue for the first half of this year. So that's on that far right, and that's the first half of last year. So you can see the representative increase in size. 17.8 on iOS App Store, 9.1 billion for the Google Play Store, and they've both increased between 27 to 30% year on year. So in the first half of this year, worldwide, people have spent $22.6 billion, all with those 99-cent apps. And, you know, a little bit more, but generally, micropayments. Henry will be very interested in this, and you may already know. A significant chunk of that revenue is spent on mobile gaming. So this is the mobile game revenue. 16.3 billion out of that 22.6 billion is spent on mobile games. It's a huge industry. It's also big in terms of the range of apps available on the App Store. Now, we all know the App Store is big, but it's really, really, really big. In 2018, the iOS App Store had over 750,000 new apps released. Google Play had 1.5 million new apps released. Translate that down to numbers of apps, new apps per week. Those are roughly the statistics that you're competing against when you're making a new app. So when you launch in the first week on the Apple App Store, you face 1,500 other apps as competition. The second week, if you haven't made enough of a marketing dent, you're up against 30,000, and then 45,000, 60,000, and you can double those numbers on the Google Play Store. So that makes my head go like this, basically. There's a gold rush mentality going on. You know, people think, wow, there's so much money involved, I could make an app. If you're interested in entering the App Store, you need to be aware of that mentality going on all around you, because it's very, very tempting just to ship something. I'll be talking about ways to kind of understand why that's not such a great idea after all, and ways to kind of do it in a more sensible manner, that you'll have some chance of success when you're facing those staggering numbers. In terms of apps that are on both platforms, on the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store, there's roughly 500,000 apps that are written basically twice. So there's some cross-platform technologies that you can write an app and it will work on Android and iOS, but they're not great. They've been around for a number of years, but they're not mature still, because the goalposts keep shifting, and performance isn't great in terms of making it feel like a proper Android app or a proper iOS app. I'm going to talk about 4 types of network apps in the marketplace. So when I mean network, I'm talking about your app and it works on a mobile network. So how does it talk to the network? The most simple kind of app you have is a single purpose app where most or the entire usage is just on your phone and it doesn't go out at all to the internet, doesn't talk to anything else. Casual gaming, is probably your biggest sector. And at most, for a casual game, it might go out and retrieve the high scores, so you know what you're competing against. But other than that, not much. Then you have your apps as a sole front end. When I talk about a network client, we're talking about servers and clients. And so your app goes out and retrieves something from the server or sends something to the server. So some examples might be your point of sale terminal systems, where you see those apps on iPads in the restaurant, and they're going out to a server and this is the order and it appears in the kitchen, or your home automation apps, or even a simple weather app where it goes out and says, what's the weather from the bureau, and then it comes back and displays that. Software as a service can also operate as a partial front end to something that's much, much more complex. So Uber, for example, is a software as a service where it enables the drivers and the passengers to meet up and deliver services to each other. So other apps that operate as a front end to multiple delivery targets would be Netflix. So you can watch Netflix on your Samsung television, on your Apple TV, on your iPad, on your Samsung tablet, on your iPhone, etc. Airbnb operates on your phone, on the desktop, in any browser. Facebook. And then app as an enabler of the network effect. So the network effect is this really interesting thing where if you have one thing, I've invented this one thing and I call it a telephone, and it's really exciting. So if you have one telephone, it's not very exciting at all. If you have two telephones, it's an interesting idea. If you have 5 telephones, you've got a great intercom system. If you have a whole city full of telephones, interesting things start to happen. Apps that piggyback the network effect to do transformative things in the industry are like Skype, WhatsApp, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Fortnite, Pokemon Go, and all your dating apps, etc. Okay, so there's been lots and lots of information to digest, lots of big numbers, scary information. Let's take a moment, ponder the network effect by watching this little funny clip that I found from the BBC about the network effect. And let's rest our minds a little bit.
Well, one of the things that we actually enjoy best of all on Blue Peter is being able to show brand new inventions. Earlier today, we recorded an experiment here in the studio that should be of interest to anyone who ever has to use the telephone. We started off with 2 telephones, and this one was perfectly normal.
It's the sort of phone you've probably got at home. It's got a handset, a curly bit of wire that goes down to here, and then a cable that goes all the way to the telephone exchange.
Well, I've got the other telephone here, and it looks more like a shoulder bag, really, than a proper telephone. It's got its own portable handset here, which has its own dial built into it. And the thing that makes it so unusual is if I get up and walk around, you'll see that there are absolutely no trailing cables of any kind. It's not connected to anything at all, because it's got its own built-in transmitter and receiver. Well, there's nothing really extraordinary, I suppose, in having a sort of walkie-talkie radio, but this is the first one that you can actually use with an ordinary telephone. And the other good thing about it is that when you use it, you don't have to dial through the operator, as you would with an ordinary mobile car phone.
Well, we're going to give you a demonstration of how this new invention works. Now, on my phone here, I'm extension 84.
You are indeed, and I'm extension 85. Remember it, John?
Yes, in
Now
my
I'm getting
memory
confused.
bank.
You're 84, OK?
I'll tell you what, Petra and I will stay here in a nice warm studio. You can take Shep for a walk.
I knew you were going to say that. Well, I will. Come on, Sheppy, you come with me, because I'm going to go right out of the studio, out to the Blue Peter garden. Now, this portable telephone is the invention of an American scientist, Mr. Lou Schnurr, and he's a teacher at the Chelmer Institute in Chelmsford, Essex. And he said he doesn't see any reason why in the future it wouldn't be possible for just about everybody to be walking around carrying one of these, their own portable communication set. Anyway, last time I was out of doors, it was pouring down with rain, so I'm taking no chances today. Get my coat on, and off I go. I'll get a hood out just in case as well. We're in Studio 8 at the Television Centre today. I'm just walking through the huge scene dock doors. This is where we get things like stuffed elephants and double-decker buses into the studio. Outside here, there's a ring road. This is used for moving scenery around. And if you watch Top of the Pops, you probably recognise that bit of scenery there. Anyway, I'm going out through the doors now. And once outside here, on my right over there is the BBC canteen block. And if you've watched Blue Peter regularly, then you'll know that our garden is very close, in fact, right next door to the canteen block. In fact, it's over the road here. As you can see, it's pretty horrible out here. Really wet and nasty. I feel a right twerp in this hood, but I'd rather wear it than get soaked to the skin. Whoops, it's slippery as well. Hi, Sheppy, you like it, don't you? And down at the end there is our actual Blue Peter garden. Anyway, I'm not going to do some gardening this minute. I'm out here to test this. So the first thing I've got to do, make sure it's switched on, which it is. Put up my aerial. Now, two things I must do. First of all, by the magic of television, you'll be able to see Johnny waiting for my call at the same time as I'm speaking to you. So first of all, to make sure I've got a line, dial 0. That's the same as picking up a handset. That's it, I've got the line. Now, his number, 84. And it's ringing in the studio.
Hello, John Noakes here.
Hello, John. Fancy seeing you. Or rather hearing you. I can't see you at all, actually.
What's it like out there?
It's soaking wet as well, you know, but it's lovely in the studio, isn't it?
Oh, it's lovely and dry.
I'm going to send Sept back in to jump all over you. He's getting soaked rushing around out here at the moment. Anyway, we've shown that it works this way, me dialing you. So don't put the phone down for a minute, because I've got to cancel the circuits first. So I'm going to press the button now, and you'll hear the dots, the little clicking sound. That's it. It's gone now. So the circuit's now clear for Johnny to try to ring me.
Well, the clicking sounds have stopped, so if I put it back down, pick it up, his number was 85, yeah. All right, should be ringing.
There we go. Every time a winner.
Hello,
John.
Yeah, me.
Every time a winner. I find it quite interesting that we have gone from, the satchel with the phone to a piece of glass, and yet we still worry about the rain with our phones. So some things have changed in 40 years, some things not so much. Okay, let's talk about marketing to this vast, endless marketplace. Obviously, you need to understand your demographic. Demographics describes statistical data about your customer. Are people familiar with this term? Your psychographic. Psychographics describes aspirational values about your customer. Here's an example. So on one side, you can see statistical data about a potential customer, and on the right-hand side, aspirational. So this woman here is single. She lives in New York City and earns $200,000 per year as a medical professional. She's 36 years old, she's female. But her aspirations, she is a basketball fan, she values family bonds, she's a good saver, she enjoys island vacations, she's a dog lover, and she likes classical music. Right? So you need to understand aspirational values as well as the demographic stats about a customer in order to sell successfully to your marketplace. Here's another example where you further define your market segment. So there's this thing called the she-economy. And that describes how women have much more power in determining purchasing power. So in the US, 58% of online retail dollars are determined by women. 80% of healthcare dollars are determined by a woman. Understanding demographics and then psychographics will help you market your app to this marketplace. If you are making a reproductive health app, for example, you'd want to brand it in such a way that it meets aspirations as well as demographics. So that's the psychographics versus demographics. When should you start marketing if you're building an app? I would recommend you start at the very beginning. You test your hypothetical market. You go, is someone going to buy my product? You test your value proposition. Are they going to pay that much for my product? Or am I charging not enough? And you test a minimum viable product. So you just sort out where you sit within the market before you spend endless dollars building an app. Because if you look at those figures again, if you market after you finish developing, that's the death of your product. Because you haven't even determined whether your app has a marketplace. So you should do marketing right at the start when you're designing your product and not after you finish developing and you go, oh, it's time to market now. You should build a conversation with your customers right at the very beginning. Let's talk about financing and business development to market. So there are multiple strategies that people have employed to build apps for the marketplace. One of them is to make a product for yourself. So you may build it for yourself and decide you want to sell it and see if other people want to buy it. And I would suggest, again, you test that before you build it, but some people do the reverse. But they also may have very different intentions. They might start an open source project and then distribute it on the App Store in the hopes of building a community around it. And so some very successful big open source apps on the App Store are Wikipedia, WordPress, VLC. There are lots and lots of smaller ones. In my experience, I've made lots of products for clients with existing businesses. So they want to build an app for their business as an add-on or a different revenue stream or a different feature. There is, of course, your VC and angel investments for your startups. One thing I haven't heard much mentioned around Enterprize is bootstrapping your startup. So bootstrapping can be seen collectively as a method or a collection of methods to minimise outside debt and people owning equity in your business so that you retain your equity in your intellectual property, in your product. I will mention that there are some very famous examples of tech startups who gained huge traction by bootstrapping before they got major investments. And these names you'll probably recognise because they're Apple, Facebook, Microsoft and eBay. So bootstrapping is a valid way. It's a more difficult way compared to outside investment. But there are some very interesting ways to think about this if you look at the period where we live right now. One method is to crowdsource a product to bootstrap your startup. And then there's this very famous theory by a man called Kevin Kelly called 1,000 True Fans. Here's a little video about the 1,000 True Fans.
This is for all the bloggers, authors, musicians, artists, podcasters, YouTubers, actors, or anyone who creates anything. You've been lied to. You don't have to become famous to make a great living as a creator. You don't need 1 million fans, and you don't need to be known around the world. All you need is 1,000 true fans. And honestly, you don't even need 1,000. A true fan is not just someone who follows you on Twitter. It's not someone who bought a product from you one time. There's a difference between a fan and a true fan. A true fan buys everything you ever made. A true fan would travel to your live event, buy your book, buy your album, sign up for your course, subscribe and follow you on every channel, and share your work with everyone they know. A true fan is dedicated to your purpose and your message. Can you make a living with just 1,000 true fans? If you only had 1,000 true fans and you found a way to collect $100 in profit per year from each person, which is not that hard to do with real true fans, you would make $100,000 per year. For most people, making $100,000 a year while doing what you love is a great life. But it's not about having exactly 1,000 true fans or making exactly $100,000 a year. It's about proving that you can make a living doing what you love, and you don't have to be famous to do it. If you only had 500 true fans and could make $200 per year from each person, you would still have $100,000 a year. And at $200 per person, even just 350 true fans would still bring you $70,000 a year. That's still a great living if you ask me. I'm not trying to tell you how much money to earn. If you want to make $1 million a year, you can still do it with 1,000 true fans by making $1,000 from each person.
Okay, interesting theory. Can you have 1,000 true fans and finance an app to market? I went on Kickstarter and I pulled up some stats. 161 true fans brought in, this is in US dollars, $75,000 US to finance their app to market. 187 fans brought in, that's in pounds, so that's roughly 100 grand. 3,700 fans brought in $82,000. These people charged a lot less. They didn't need $100 from their customers, so they attracted 9,645 backers and brought in 87 grand. 557 true fans brought in 110 grand. 2,000 true fans brought in 200 grand. 5,000 fans brought in 330 grand. This is US dollars, remember? This is very interesting. 4,500 fans brought in over $500,000. So these people went and developed their app, and then it was successful. And then they went back on Indiegogo, and they did a second iteration, and they attracted an additional 6,500 true fans, and they brought in another $1.5 million. And of course, Double Fine Adventure. 87,000 true fans brought them $3.3 million US. I think it's valid to say that the theory of 1,000 true fans works in this era of crowdfunding. It's not easy. They are a bit like unicorns. They're rare, have to be done extremely well, but you can do it. Once you get your app onto the store, then there's this thing called monetization, where you go, well, how can I bring in a revenue stream from the app now that it's on the store? And there are these 5 terms. There's free, freemium, paid, paidmium, and subscription. Free is your free app, and there are lots of free apps, particularly on Google Play. And they may show ads because they attract a revenue stream from showing ads. It's very, very hard to actually make a decent income with ads. Freemium is where you download a free app and then you can pay to upgrade the app to do something more professional within the app or get rid of the ads. Your paid app is what it says. I'll pay you $1. I just want the app, thanks. Thank you very much, no more. Paidmium is where you pay for your app, and then there are existing options within the app where you can pay for additional features to be enabled. So, for example, in the music world, it's very common for paidmium apps. So I recently purchased a $30 piano on the App Store that runs on my iPhone, and it's this gorgeous, gorgeous sampled piano that, you know, roughly the equivalent of $300 on my desktop, but it was $30. And it also had these amazing sounding Fender Rhodes and clavichords and clavinets. So I paid another $30 and I had a whole set of electric pianos and electric instruments. So that's an example of a paidmium app. And of course, subscription apps. So you can have free apps that you download and you pay a subscription to enable monthly, Netflix being a prime example. It's very, very interesting to note that Apple is encouraging all their developers on the iOS platform to gradually move away from the one-off payment to subscription payment. And people are a bit nervous about this because it's fine to have 1 or 2 subscription apps, but what happens if you have 10 or 20 that are additional recurring charges? We don't know how consumers feel about that yet. But that's Apple's official stance on it, that they're encouraging developers to try the subscriptions because it's a way to pay for gotchas. So why would you want to pay for these sorts of things? Well, every year Apple releases new iPhones. New iPhone last week, and today iOS 12 came out. Happy birthday, iOS. So these new operating systems, year after year, give you additional features to your older phones and support the brand new phones with super swanky features that aren't available on the older phones. It happens for both Android devices and iOS devices. In the App Store Apple world, it's actually not too bad. At the start of September, 85% of your users was using the current version of the OS. And only 10% were people using last year's version of the OS. And then your smaller 5% would be people who've got older devices that can't upgrade because they're not powerful enough to run these features. And the adoption rate is actually very, very fast in the Apple world. In 3 months, when iOS was released, you hit 80%. And that's been the same year after year. So on iOS, you would be straddling multiple devices from past years with different hardware capabilities. So for example, here's a current usage of iPhones, different models of iPhones, and you can see that the popular iPhones that are still in use, iPhone 6S, iPhone 7, iPhone 7 Plus, and also the iPhone 10. And iOS 12 will support all these devices, not just the ones in the red, but all the ones from iPhone 6 onwards, because of their processor, for at least another year. There is a really dirty word called fragmentation. And that doesn't really happen very much in the Apple world. But for Android, it's that same picture. You straddle multiple devices for past years with different hardware capabilities, and you've got to support different OS versions. So if you look at the picture of Android, you've got roughly a quarter of your users using the current version and the rest using older versions. This is almost opposite to the picture in the Apple world. This means that you've got a lot of users to support in this purple chunk, but this purple chunk gets even more complicated because remember how I said that Apple users update to the latest OS in about 3 months? It takes a lot longer for Android users to update, if they update at all, because the handset manufacturers that license Android aren't really keen about updating the older phones. They just rather sell you a new phone because they're not premium phones. They're just cheap things that they make generally. And so you'd be lucky if you even got one software update. If you look at it over time, these are the releases year by year of different Android versions. And you can see that earlier on, people updated really quickly, but as newer versions came out, it got slower and slower until you come up with this mess. Here, this is the first half of 2018, and you've got to support people on 6.0, 7.0, 7.1, 5.0, 5.1, and back to that mind exploding emoji. The BBC tried to make iPlayer work for Android, and they had to buy over 1,500 devices to test compatibility, and they still found it a nightmare. So if you want to make an Android app, you need to be very cautious about what you're going to support. Are you going to support the more premium devices, or are you going to support low-end devices, or are you going to support both ends? It can be hugely time-consuming and hugely costly. Hugely costly. It can be very costly to support lots of Android devices. Other gotchas. How do you become visible in the App Store? How do people discover you? Which all goes back to marketing. So it's lovely to wander around a marketplace that looks like this. You know, you start at this end, you gradually wander, and you end up at the other end. It's not so much fun when the App Store looks like that, and your horizon basically goes into infinity, and you can wander around for hours and hours and not find what you want. And you need to build a different conversation with your customer, which is why I go back to this. Marketing starts at the beginning of your product development cycle, because if you want to reach those customers, you need to reach them at the start. You need to actually test whether this product is going to be viable. You need to plan for the long haul. So once you've shipped your app, you also need to have a way to support the app. So when people write in and say, it doesn't work on my phone, or it works and then it crashes here, you have some customer support, because there are App Store ratings. And so if you have bad customer support, you get bad App Store ratings, no one downloads you, blah, blah, blah. You also need to plan for localization, which is the opposite end of the coin. If you're really successful, you want to translate your app into different languages because you've got this global market. So plan for localization. What are the popular categories of apps that people use? This is 2017. And you'll notice we talked about Gaffer before. So Facebook itself doesn't, they don't make phones. They tried. They're still trying. But you'll notice that the first top 4 of all overall downloads on both app stores are all Facebook properties. WhatsApp's owned by Facebook, Facebook Messenger, Facebook itself, and Instagram. On the Apple App Store, the picture's very similar. It's interesting, but not surprising to note that YouTube and Google Maps are downloads because on Android, they come shipped with the phone because it's a Google phone. But if you want Google on your Google Video on your phone, you need to download YouTube, you need to download Google Maps. Taobao is the world's biggest e-commerce website. And this is a front end to that. It's a Chinese website. It's owned by Alibaba, and it's the 10th most popular download in the world. I kind of find it sad that number 10 for Android is Clean Master myself. It's 2018, surely they would have fixed that by now, but yeah. What are the different categories in popularity? Well, 20% of your apps are social media, social networking, then music, then games, then photos, etc. Media consumption, social networking are all hugely popular on the App Store. And that's why you see lots of new social media networks starting up because people are jumping in, trying to go, we can be the next Instagram, we can be the next Facebook. I will note that we've talked about consumer spending on the App Store. We haven't talked about how this chunk here, this 20% of social media is actually financed by third parties outside of the App Store. Because if you think about Facebook, their revenue stream is from the advertisers. They're selling you as the data to their advertisers. And so there's this enormous revenue stream, which is invisible in this talk, that's going on in the App Store as well. So the App Store represents global opportunity, very low overheads, because you can ship to this. So I want to finish the talk with some encouraging words from Dr. Seuss. This is from this fantastic book called Oh, the Places You'll Go. If you take this global opportunity to market your app to this global marketplace, congratulations, today is your day. You're off to great places, you're off and away. You have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes, you can steer yourself any direction you choose. You're on your own, you know what you know, you're the person who'll decide where to go. And then things start to happen. Don't worry, don't stew, just go right along, you'll start happening too. You'll get mixed up, of course, as you already know. You'll get mixed up with many strange birds as you'll go. So be sure when you step with care and great tact, and remember that life's a great balancing act. Just never forget to be dexterous and deft, and never mix up your right foot with your left. And will you succeed? Yes, you will, indeed. 98.75% guaranteed. Thank you. So if you hit that URL, thank you, you'll get a link to all these articles where I've referenced those stats from. And I hope you find all this information useful with the bird's eye view of the App Store.